Rick, do you want to go ahead and call the meeting to order?
All right, I'd like to take the opportunity to call this meeting presentation of the Ethics Board to order.
Okay. Leah, why don't you go ahead and do a roll call just so we can acknowledge all four of us are present?
Board Member Mann,
Present.
Board Member Breen,
Present.
Board Member Posenski,
Present.
and City Attorney Howlett.
Present. Okay.
All right.
And that,
Before we begin, what I would, one thing I would like to do is to move to amend the agenda to add 2 additional agenda items. Item 8 would be a vote by the board to accept the proposed forms, and vote 9 as a vote to accept the rules and procedures, both of which will be discussed in a few minutes. So I move to amend to include that.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. And then I would like to take the opportunity to turn this over to Mr. Howlett, who will introduce the origins of the ethics ordinance and introduce the 3 inaugural members.
thank you. And I think it's probably clear to everybody, but this is the first meeting of the Ethics Board. And so we did want to provide some background information, an introduction. And so I'll take care of that at the beginning of the meeting. In terms of the origins of the ethics ordinance, I think it was not in response to a specific incident. There wasn't a howling call to do it because there were significant problems. I think it was recognized before my time as city attorney as good government, good transparency, and the proper way to independently address any questions, concerns, or actual conflicts of interest in the conduct of city government. And so we went through the process via the ordinance committee of drafting and then redrafting the ethics ordinance as it exists today. I think we've discussed before, we used primarily the city of Birmingham, but some other background models to craft the ordinance itself. And that's how the ethics ordinance came to be. Moving on to agenda item number 3, with that brief introduction of the ethics ordinance, we thought we would take the opportunity as the first meeting to introduce the members of the Board of Ethics that were nominated by Mayor Denner and then approved by the City Council. And I'll ask each one of them to just give a brief, introduce themselves and give a brief introduction, and then we can move on. I'll start with David Breen. Dave, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Dave Breen. I've met many of the people I see on the list before. I've been a park resident for, I don't know, maybe 45 years of my life in various places. I'm a retired partner from PricewaterhouseCoopers and am happy to serve. That's it, Jake.
Okay, no problem.
Is
Board
that
Member Mann, if you want to go next.
Hello, greetings, everyone. I am Lawrence Mann. I have resided in the park for approximately 30 years in the same house. I'm retired from the faculty at Wayne's Law School and also from a managing partner position at the law firm of Bowman and Brooke. And that's all, folks.
And I guess that leaves me. My name is Rick Posenski. I too have been a longtime member of the city of Grosse Pointe Park. We've been in the community over 30 years. I too am a retired attorney, having worked, having practiced for over 40 years, having worked for over 25 of those at Masco Corporation. I'm currently very actively involved in volunteering time at Accounting Aid Society and Legal Aid Society, and sitting on the board of the Detroit Goodfellows.
I won't bother to introduce myself since I think people have become all too familiar with me in the last several months. But I am the city attorney here in Grosse Pointe Park. I do serve in an ex officio non-voting capacity so that it's clear to everybody, and that's per the ordinance. That I think takes us to, Leah, the public comment on agenda items.
You want me to hop in, Jake?
Yeah, if you could, we'll go ahead and get going with the public comment on agenda items.
Okay, great. So for everybody who usually attends these meetings, what we're going to be doing is the same thing that we do. So I'm going to share a 3-minute timer. If you would like to be added to the queue, you just need to press *9 or on your keypad or use the raise hand function. The first person in the queue is Martin. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. And please state your name and city of residency for the record. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Leah. Martin Steiger, Grosse Pointe Park resident. I wanted to start by thanking the board members, the new board members, all the board members for their service. I just had some comments about the proposed procedural rules. I think they're a good start, but there are a few ways that we can improve them. There do seem to be a few holes that I see. First, there's no provisions in there regarding conflicts of interest for the members of the board. Like, for example, what constitutes a conflict that would require recusal on their part? What happens if a board member needs to recuse? Can they hold a hearing with just 2 board members if one of them has to recuse? What happens if there's a gridlock if one of them has to recuse and there's only 2 remaining? I think that issue needs to be addressed, even though it's unlikely that there would be a conflict for one of them. I think that issue needs to be included. There are no provisions regarding board members' attendance, requiring them to attend any of these hearings. So can the board conduct a hearing with only 1 or 2 members if somebody is unable to attend? These hearings most likely will be like mini trials, and the members are essentially the jury, so they should be required to attend. So what happens if one of them cannot attend at the last minute? Third, the provision regarding post-meeting evidence in Rule 214. If any such evidence is submitted to the board, it should be shared with all parties. There's no such requirement in the rules. And the opposing party, I think, should be given the opportunity to respond to any new evidence that's submitted in some form or fashion before the record is closed. And fourth, in Chapter 2, Paragraph 3 at the bottom of the first page of the rules, it says that in instances involving alleged conflicts of interest, the affected city body may request the board to decide, that's the word used, decide the question of whether the official, employee, or consultant must refrain from discussion, deliberation, action, or voting because of the conflict. Does this mean that in those cases, the board makes the decision and that decision is final and binding on the body that made the request? That decision is more than just an advisory opinion in that instance? Because the ethics ordinance says that the ethics board is, quote, an advisory body that issues, quote, advisory opinions. It says nothing about the board making final decisions that are binding on other city bodies. So it sounds like this rule is trying to give the board a power that it was never really given by council under the ethics ordinance. Fifth, I noticed a typo, the small typo in that first line of paragraph 3. They use the word where twice. And lastly, just a question, why is their reference to consultants, city consultants, and not contractors in the proposed rules? Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney Howlett and Board Member Posenski, I don't have any further public comment at this time.
All right, just pulling up my agenda here. Okay, let's move forward then, Rick, as long as you agree on the agenda items, and then when we, I think, get to the discussion, we can address those topics and any other topics, as we discuss the policies and procedures themselves.
Sure, because I mean, those are very interesting and informative comments, and very much appreciated, Martin, that you brought those up. With respect to the proposed rules of procedure, the city's ethics ordinance contemplates 3 different settings for review by the ethics board. One is a request for an advisory opinion, one a complaint about an action taken by an employee or city official, and the third a claim that a member of council or if a city committee has a conflict of interest in an issue that's subject of discussion or to be voted upon, and necessitating whether that council member or committee member refrain from voting or participating in an official discussion on the subject. The rules and regulations that we drafted are designed to try to affect these types of review, inform the public and city employees about how to seek an opinion from the board, identify who may ask for review and participate in the process, and delineate how the hearing will be conducted and what process rights the participating parties will have. The differences between these three types of review are important, particularly since in some cases only a city employee or an official can request that the ethics board render an opinion, while any member of the public can file a complaint against the city employee or official for something they've done, what's referred to in the ordinance as a complaint. Only a city employee or an official under the proposed rules may ask for an advisory opinion. This is because the purpose of the advisory opinion is to get a ruling in advance of taking an action of some sort in order to determine whether that action would violate the ethics ordinance. And I'll speak more on that in a moment. Similarly, in the case of a challenge as to whether a member of council or a city committee has a conflict of interest and therefore must refrain from participating in an issue under consideration, only a member of the committee or a member of council with respect to matters before that body may ask for the ethics review board to get involved and to render an opinion. So let's talk a little bit more about the three different procedures, starting with complaints. Complaints are charges that are made where the deed is done. And it's now for the board to render an opinion as to whether what deed was done violated the ordinance. Theoretically, conduct in violation of the ordinance could lead to sanctions, perhaps even discharge of a city employee. And that's the reason why the procedural rules that we propose are drafted with the greatest amount of detail and procedural considerations. Provides for a hearing, ruling on a complaint, and 28 days of notice, a challenge to be heard, and public hearing. Even then, however, the ethics board is not a court. It's an advisory body created by council to issue opinions on whether a specific set of facts are in keeping with the ethics ordinance that took effect in August, or instead in breach of that, in August, or are instead a breach of the ordinance itself. As such, we don't anticipate that hearings will be as formal as a trial. Still, they're serious matters and may have significant consequences, and so will be run with decorum, with an eye toward ensuring the process is open and that it's fair, especially to the person whose conduct is being called into question. Questions about conflicts of interest, similar to complaints about a person's conduct, are also serious matters that can amount to a potentially heated contest between differing sides. Similar in some respects to complaints, we anticipate that there will be one side making a presentation about whether someone has a conflict of interest that makes them ineligible to participate in a debate and referendum on an issue, and a response that defends the person claimed to have the conflict. As with complaints, witnesses may be called, and each side will have the opportunity to make an opening and a closing statement. Finally, with respect to advisory opinions, they're expected to be the least confrontational and contentious of the three requests for an opinion from the board. And we also expect, as I'll mention in a second from discussions with folks in Birmingham, that this is the most frequent sort of request for opinion that we will encounter. There's an old saying, it's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission, but that's not true in the world of ethics. And that's the beauty of asking for an advisory opinion. By asking for permission, if you will, you avoid the potential of someone later challenging your conduct as a violation of the ordinance. You might ask, how do opinions get rendered? The short answer is in writing. The deliberations of the ethics board are public, as will be the hearings. The opinions will be written and will be made public and will be filed with the clerk. Opinions of the board are based on a majority, 2 out of 3, when there's 3 people participating. Although the rules as drafted contemplate potentially having dissenting and concurring opinions. The goal is to ensure that the public is aware of the thought processes that went into the official opinion rendered. And in this way, it's our hope that the entire process is a public education opportunity. A final couple of issues. First, it's worth mentioning that the ethics ordinance applies not just to city employees, but also to consultants. Now, I think Martin had asked about contractors, but the statute itself mentions consultants. It doesn't mention contractors. City official or employee is defined in the ordinance as meaning a person elected, appointed, or otherwise serving in any capacity with the city in any position established by the city charter or by city ordinance which involves the exercise of public power, trust, or duty. The term includes all officials and employees of the city, whether or not they receive compensation, including consultants and persons who serve on advisory boards and commissions. The term does not include election inspectors and student representatives appointed to the city boards or commissions. And then consultant is defined as a person who gives a professional advice or services regarding matters in the field of his or her special knowledge or training. Second, as Jake mentioned, the Grosse Pointe Park Ethics Ordinance was fashioned on the longstanding Birmingham Ordinance. Similarly, the procedural rules that we drafted are based largely on their rules. One reason is the old adage, why reinvent the wheel? But another reason is because in speaking with a longtime member of the Birmingham Ethics Committee, we had the benefit of learning from their experience. The rules they now use evolved over time based on that experience. And so we're getting the advantage of that experience without having to have paid the price, if you will. The rules have a long history of effectiveness as described to us, so we fully expect that they will be just as effective for Grosse Pointe Park. Those are all of the comments that I had, Jake.
Okay. Then I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion of the forms. Dave, I think that's you, right?
Yes, thank you, Jake. And I too want to thank Martin for his observations and questions. The forms, this part's pretty simple. Rick described the three avenues, if you will, to requesting opinions from the ethics committee. And there's a form for each one of them, one for the ethics complaint, one for the request for the advisory committee, and a third for the request for opinion regarding questions of disqualification. Those are the titles of the forms as well. They would need to be completed, attach supporting documentation as necessary, and submitted to the city clerk. The city clerk then begins the process with us. So until these forms are prepared and filed with the city clerk, we don't begin our processes as well. The forms will be uploaded to the website shortly, and there's a forms and documents section in the city's website, and that's where you'll be able to find them. And I believe there will also be a link from the ethics committee or ethics board page to those forms as well. And Mr. Chairman, it's really that simple, I think.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Larry, do you want to speak at all about your perspective on the role of the ethics board?
I will, but I think that you guys just wanted me to have something to say because you've mostly said it all. I think the best way to talk about what the Ethics Review Board is to first talk about what it's not. As has already been pointed out, it's not a court. We don't have the significant body of procedural and evidentiary rules that govern either state or federal court. Perhaps more importantly, we don't have any coercive power. In the federal system, the federal judge can order the marshals to take property, close a business, arrest people, do any number of things. We don't have such power. In the state courts, the sheriff's department performs that role. We simply provide an opinion, which is basically a recommendation about how a particular quote unquote ethics related conflict ought to be viewed. We have very, very limited jurisdiction. everything we do has to come within the four corners of the ordinance, and now within the four corners of the rules of procedure that we hope to adopt tonight. We do not independently go around and identify ethics issues within the city of Grosse Pointe Park. That is not our role. Our role is to take a look at and closely scrutinize cases or controversies that come to us in the form of the various forms, that is the complaint forms. And that's basically it. Something has to come to us in the form of a complaint or request before we can act. It follows from all of that that we are not an independent investigative agency of any sort. We have no capacity to do that. And what we do is simply provide opinions and advice with respect to the ordinance, but only when asked. Lastly, it follows that individually, as members of the board, we have nothing to say with respect to ethics issues. That is, when I'm walking my dog or when Dave is cutting his lawn, if someone were to ask him about an ethics issue that pertains to the city of Grosse Pointe Park, he doesn't have anything to say other than you ought to consider filing a claim, right? We are only empowered to act within the confines of the Board of Ethics Review, and then and only then do we render opinions that are advisory in nature. Basically, I think that's it.
Thank you, Larry. Jake, I think we move on to the two additional items then, items 8 and 9. Is that
And
correct?
so, right, it is. And so procedurally, we're now at, I think the first item, if I recall correctly, is the vote on adopting the applicable forms. And so we'll need a motion, a second, and then any discussion about that. And then we can call the vote if there is, either after the discussion or if there is no discussion.
Before we get to that, may I make a comment? I was
Sure.
remiss in not doing it. Whoever the gentleman was that raised the questions, I think each of us on the board thanks you. That was really very, very helpful. And I am so pleased that you spent the amount of time that was necessary for you to provide the critique that you provided. Thank you very much.
Agreed. All right, Jake, I would move then to adopt as the applicable forms to be used by this ethics board, the 3 forms that were submitted and that Dave had talked about earlier.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? So those become the official forms of the Ethics Review Board.
And then now, Rick, it's the same process for these, but given the comments, if there is to be a discussion or you guys want to address those, this would be the appropriate time, would be motion, second, and then discussion prior to the vote.
Well, what I was going to suggest was, I'm concerned about the fact that we've been in existence for a couple months and haven't established any procedural rules or made available the forms to use. And I'm really taken with the comments Mr. Steiger made. I think that we need to discuss perhaps how we implement or incorporate those comments into the rules. But my inclination is to at least move to adopt the rules so we have a working system in place with an eye towards perhaps within the next week or two providing some modification to take into account some of the things that he's proposed. So with that, I would move that we would adopt the rules of procedure that had been submitted for public comment and to use those for now and then with an eye perhaps towards modifying them shortly thereafter.
Support.
All in favor?
Well,
Aye.
now we need discussion, I think, right, Jake? So we have a
Well,
motion.
with a motion and support, if there,
So from a discussion
you can call for
standpoint,
discussion.
right, I basically
You
echo,
can call for discussion. If there is no discussion, then it moves to the vote.
right. So I'd like to discuss just briefly, basically support everything Rick just said. I think we need them in place now. In the event we need to do something, because it's been a while and they've been ready to get on the shelf. But I think I agree with Rick. In the next few weeks, we should consider the comments we heard tonight and see what changes we might recommend for a future meeting.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. What do you, anything, Larry?
I tend to agree with both of you. I am greatly concerned about one of the comments that was made, and that was the one that pertains to trial in the absence of all three members attending. And if I were a party to such trial, I would not be happy. And so I think that while in perhaps other instances that are ministerial, two people could well function as a board, but when there is an actual case or controversy under review, I tend to doubt it. So having put that gloss on my agreement, I agree. We should go forward and adopt and then backfill and make some changes where necessary.
And just one quick point, just to piggyback on all of that, again, and I'm a non-voting member, but the rules do provide the flexibility for this board to act in a way. I guess I'll phrase it this way. If this board didn't want to hold a trial or a hearing with two people, it wouldn't have to, right? So we want to make sure that things are codified for the future and not just this board, and because it's the right thing to do. But by passing these rules tonight, we're not locked in on certain of these issues. There is flexibility, if you recall, in the rules and procedures to help protect the fact, that this process is sort of a living, breathing process, and there is some flexibility there. So my only point there is if we adopt them tonight, we can still amend them, or if you guys adopt them tonight, they can still be amended and changed and voted on, and there is that flexibility built into the rules.
All right, well, let's at least take a vote on having these rules in place, so at least we can get started as a body, and then we'll.
There's a hand up I'm noticing.
Right, and that'll be for public comment after the vote. There's another round of public comment.
Okay. So Jake, I take it then we move to vote?
Correct.
All right. So I think I had a motion pending that was seconded. All in favor, I say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so those rules will be the rules we will work with at this time. All right. Jake, I think you said now there's further comment to be made?
Yeah, it looks like there's a hand raised. So Leah, if you could manage the non-agenda item public comment.
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much.
Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to share the timer again. And then Mary, you are first. If you can please unmute yourself and state your name and city of residency, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Leah. Mary Rulo, Grosse Pointe Park. Good evening and welcome, gentlemen. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyhow. I am getting the impression that you do not see as your role to suggest changes to the ordinance to council that would make for a stronger ethical standard. I say this because when the ordinance was adopted, I had sent a list of 9 changes to council that I suggested be made to make this a stronger ordinance, and almost all of which were not adopted, including some key provisions. So I guess it's going to be our role to go back to council at some point for changes. But if you would clarify that, it would be helpful. If you see that as one of your roles, an advisory to council on changes to the ordinance. Thank you.
Well, if I might speak to that, I don't see this as our role to make suggestions to council. I don't see it as not perhaps being verboten either. I will say, look, this is a brand new committee, and our goal is to be helpful and an educational body that assists the citizens in feeling confident in their city and the integrity of its government. So I could see us at some point, perhaps among ourselves, feeling that we should make some comments to council, but it would be up to council. We're not in a position to change what the ordinance is.
I fully understand that.
I also would like to respond if that's okay. It seems to me from first reading the ordinance and then sharing it with Jake and everyone else, my thought was that it could benefit from some wordsmithing and some changes. I think that over the course of our practice, we are necessarily going to have to make that kind of input and recommendation. What council does with that is purely up to council. But it just seems to me to be assigned this task is perforce to be assigned the task of monitoring how the ordinance is operating, given the cases and controversies that we're called upon to decide. So that's kind of an evolving thing. It's not our first mission, but it's part and parcel of the mission that we've been given.
And if I could just piggyback on that real quick, as the board that's tasked with operating under that ordinance, it would be entirely appropriate to suggest issues or difficulties or changes. And then, I think the sort of chain of command would be, we have an ordinance committee and they would review it, and then it's ultimately up to city council. But to Rick's point, it is not verboten. And I would imagine as the group required to operate under that ordinance, anybody would welcome commentary from this board with suggestions about improving that ordinance.
Were there any other comments pending?
I don't have any other further public comment in the queue. Thank you.
And Mary, thank you for your comments. I do appreciate your interest. I appreciate the interest of all who attended today. As I say, it's a new world for us as well, and so we're grateful for the public interest and for folks joining in, and feel like that gives us support to feel like we're moving in the right direction. So thank you. With that, I would move to adjourn the meeting at this point.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
You're muted, Dave.
All right.
We're going to have to work on the Zoom.
No,
All of us.
It's a 6-hour meeting today, so I know to mute immediately after talking.
You're right. So, all right. Well, thank you all. Thank you to the public who joined and for the comments that were made, and very much appreciate the support. And we'll get on with business as a new ethics review board. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.